In the crowded heart of ancient Rome, where marble columns glowed beneath the Mediterranean sun, and the roar of the crowd could shake the stones of the Colosseum, time itself was always present. Though no one could see it, time dictated when gladiators would clash, how long a general might speak before the Senate, how long a trial could last, and even how much daylight remained for the endless march of commerce. Yet time, that invisible master, was not easy to control. The sundial, the proud invention of earlier civilizations and a familiar sight across Roman forums, was imprecise and cruelly dependent on the whims of the weather. A single cloudy day, a shadow out of place, and the hours would vanish into uncertainty. For an empire that prided itself on order, discipline, and precision, such a fragile tool was not enough. It was in this pressing need for certainty that the Romans embraced the water clock, or time's clepsydra, asterisk. The name itself whispered of mystery, drawn from the Greek words meaning to steal water. To steal water, the Romans believed, was to steal moments from eternity and turn them into something human, measurable, and enforceable. Imagine a bronze vessel, perfectly shaped and carefully balanced, where water dripped in slow, deliberate rhythm. Each drop marked a fraction of life passing away. The surface of the water rose, or fell, or pressed against a carved scale, each movement telling the watcher how much time had elapsed. In that gentle sound of dripping, the Romans heard the steady heartbeat of their empire. But the clepsydra was more than just a mechanical curiosity. In the courts of Rome, where the fate of men hung on eloquence, it was a weapon. The prosecutor's voice, the defense's pleas, even the accused man's desperate final words were confined to the flow of water. When the level reached its mark, when the vessel emptied, silence fell. No more words, no more defense. Justice or injustice had been measured, not in fairness, but in drops of liquid sliding silently through clay or bronze. One can picture the tension in those courts. A senator, sweat forming on his brow, speaking faster and faster as the water slipped away. A prisoner glancing sideways, his eyes fixed not on the jurors, but on the vessel, watching his life drain with every drop. The crowd holding its breath, knowing that when the last line was reached, the curtain would fall. In those moments, time was no longer abstract. It was visible, physical, merciless. The Romans did not invent the water clock. The Egyptians and Babylonians had experimented with them centuries before, and the Greeks refined them into workable instruments. But what Rome did was give the clepsydra a new role, a civic, social, and political power unlike any other. In the arenas, time determined the pacing of games, how long gladiators might endure combat before death or mercy intervened. In the military camps, time regulated watches, drills, and punishments, ensuring that even in the farthest outpost, the empire's discipline ticked onward. In the homes of the wealthy, miniature versions regulated meals, studies, and even philosophical debates, reminding patricians that their leisure was also bound by invisible chains. To a Roman, the water clock was not just a device. It was a statement. It declared that time could be commanded, contained, and enforced. It reminded the empire's citizens that no one, not even the most powerful senator, could escape its steady dripping. The sundial may have cast its shadows across marble courtyards, but the clepsydra dripped in silence, always moving forward, always counting down. There is something profoundly human about this quest. The Romans, masters of stone and steel, conquerors of seas and lands, were still fragile before time. They built aqueducts to tame rivers, roads to bind continents, and walls to resist enemies. But against the endless tide of moments slipping into eternity, they built a clock of water, a fragile, almost poetic attempt to seize what cannot be seized. And in that attempt, they left behind more than an invention. They left behind a philosophy, that life, however grand or fleeting, must be measured if it is to have meaning. If you stood beside a Roman water clock, you might be surprised at its simplicity. No gears whirring, no bells ringing, no metal pendulums swinging, as in the clocks of later centuries. Instead, there was only water, falling with patience, drop by drop, from one vessel to another. And yet in that simplicity lay a precision the Romans prized. The secret was in the way the water moved, in how the engineers shaped and calibrated each opening, each line etched onto the receiving container. A hole too wide, and time would rush forward like a flood. Too narrow, and it would crawl like a dying flame. To regulate the outflow so that each hour matched the steady passage of the sun was no small feat. Inside courts, the mechanism was stripped to its essence. A bronze or clay container filled with water. At its base, a small hole carefully drilled to release a constant trickle. A second container would catch the stream, rising slowly, and along its wall marks indicated increments of time. A judge or magistrate might glance at the scale, then nod to the speaker. "Your time is nearly done." The final drop was not just an end to words, but the sounding of a sentence, a decision sealed. There were other, more elaborate designs. Some water clocks contained floating rods or discs, rising with the water and pointing to marks on a scale, so that one could read the hour as easily as the shadow on a sundial. Others used siphons or valves to maintain a more consistent flow, fighting against the tendency of water pressure to slow as the vessel emptied. At their most advanced, water clocks became miniature theaters of science, with multiple jars, levers, even figurines that moved as the water reached certain levels. For a society that revered spectacle, this was time turned into performance. The Romans found endless uses for these devices. Imagine a senator's speech, clipped by the steady rise of water. His arguments sharpen as he rushes to complete them before the clock runs dry. The very sound of dripping became a kind of invisible drumbeat, urging him forward, punishing hesitation. Or picture an astronomer in Alexandria, gazing through the night sky, while a water clock beside him tracked the hours of darkness. To map the heavens, one needed not only eyes, but a reliable measure of time. The clepsydra, humble in form, became a partner in the search for cosmic order. In private life, too, time dripped steadily on. Wealthy households sometimes owned small water clocks, their polished bronze gleaming by lamplight. They measured time for lectures, for philosophical debates, for the quiet rituals of daily life. In a world without ticking watches or digital screens, the slow, inevitable flow of water was a gentle reminder that life itself could be measured and organized. Yet the power of these clocks was never only mechanical. They carried a kind of poetry. Watch a single drop form, swell, and fall, then another and another, until hours have passed. Each one is identical, yet once gone, it can never return. In the hush of a Roman court, in the noisy chaos of a forum, or in the solitude of a scholar's chamber, the sound of water slipping through a narrow hole was the same reminder that time is steady, silent, unstoppable. The metaphor was not lost on the Romans. Poets compared the flow of water to the flow of life itself, a river carrying all things to the sea of death. To stand before a clepsydra was to face that truth in miniature. Every rise of water against a carved line was another moment gone, another hour that could never be retrieved. The clock was not only a tool of law and science, but a mirror of mortality. And yet, perhaps this is why the Romans revered it, for in that fragile stream, they found a way to bind the infinite, to hold eternity in a clay jar, to divide it into measurable pieces, and to say, "Here is 1 hour, here is 2, here is the limit of your voice, your power, your life." The water clock gave them order, justice, knowledge, but above all, it gave them the courage to believe they could master even the flow of time itself. As the empire stretched to its limits, the water clock had become more than an object. It was a quiet companion to Rome's greatness. In courts, in barracks, in temples and homes, the steady drip was the rhythm of discipline. But when the empire itself began to falter, the rhythm grew faint. Roads that once connected provinces to the capital crumbled. Aqueducts that carried lifeblood to cities dried in silence. And the clepsydra, too, lost its place in a world unraveling. When Rome collapsed in the west, its precision collapsed with it. Many of the ingenious designs were forgotten. Workshops that once crafted polished bronze vessels were abandoned. The courts that timed speeches with trickling water fell into ruins. To live in Europe after the fall of Rome was to live in a landscape where time itself seemed unmeasured. Shadows on sundials returned as the dominant rulers of the hours, imprecise and untrustworthy. The silence where water once dripped was the silence of a civilization forgetting how to control its own heartbeat. And yet the clepsydra did not vanish everywhere. In the Byzantine East, scholars preserved fragments of the old knowledge. In the Islamic world, engineers carried the Roman inheritance forward. In Baghdad, in Damascus, in Cordoba, water clocks were built taller, grander, more ambitious, sometimes adorned with automata mechanical birds, singing, figures striking bells, each drop not only measuring time, but transforming it into spectacle. The Roman spirit lingered, reshaped through new hands. Centuries passed before Europe rediscovered time in its fullest sense. In the late Middle Ages, mechanical clocks began to rise in cathedral towers, their iron gears clanging the hours for all to hear. These inventions were marvels, yet they echoed the ancient ambition of the Romans, to bind time in a machine, to give order to chaos. Where once water slipped silently, now iron teeth bit steadily into wheels, ticking against the void. The clepsydra had given way to the clock, but its essence lived on. There is a haunting truth in this legacy. Rome believed it could measure life itself, drop by drop, and for a time, it succeeded. But in the end, no empire can master time. The water that once dripped through bronze vessels still drips today, only now into the abyss of history. We can reconstruct their methods, study the vessels in museums, read the accounts of scholars, but we cannot hear the exact sound that echoed in those courts, those homes, those barracks. The heartbeat of Rome's time has been stilled, and yet, perhaps that is the lesson. The clepsydra was never truly about accuracy. It was about the human need to confront what is fleeting, to take the invisible and make it tangible, to watch life flow through one's fingers, and to believe, even for a moment, that it could be held. When the last water clocks of Rome were silenced, time itself did not stop, but Rome did. The empire was measured, not by drops of water, but by centuries. Today, we carry time on our wrists, in our pockets, glowing on digital screens. We measure it to the fraction of a second, far beyond the dreams of Rome. Yet in that precision, something has been lost: the poetry of a drop, the slow rise of water against a vessel's edge, the awareness that time is not just counted but lived. The Romans, in their pursuit of control, built a clock that reminded them of fragility, and perhaps that is why their story still calls to us. The clepsydra whispered a truth. Time is flowing, unstoppable, a river that carries us all. The Romans tried to catch it in their hands. They could not hold it forever. Neither can we.